So a long time ago, the people of Israel kept saying over and over again, give us a king. And God finally relented on this. You don't want a king. That's not what you want. And finally he just said, okay, fine, I'll let you have a king. So he decided to give them a king, and Samuel was sent out to find somebody to be king. God had a direction for him. If you look over in 1 Samuel chapter 16, starting in verse 6, it says there, and it came to pass when they were come that he looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. So, as we find here, and we're not really talking about the king of Israel, it's more so what God looks at. How does God measure people? He looked at Samuel and was like, oh, here's the guy. And no. Don't look at the outward things. I don't see things the way you see things. And this continues to be true. He doesn't see things the way we see things. Often we look at somebody and ourselves, all around us, and ourselves, unfortunately, too, and we measure ourselves by the wrong standards. We don't look at things the way God looks at them. Unfortunately, sometimes we'll look at other Christians and ourselves, and we'll measure by our attendance. How often are we here? If we attend every single service, every time the doors are open, we must be faithful. And if we miss one, for any reason whatsoever, they must be weak. You know how that works, right? If I'm here, I'm strong. If they miss, they're weak. Yeah, it kind of works out that way. We measure that way, right? It's one way to look at it. Others will look at maybe participation in the activities that the church gets involved in. If you're here for all the Bible classes, that's a strong Christian right there. If they're out there for the evangelism classes, they're out there visiting people and working and helping people out, they must be pretty strong. They really must. But, if for any reason, just somebody says, I tell you what, I just don't have today to be able to go and do this work for whatever reason it might be, I just don't think they're committed enough. Yeah. And, we tend to measure that way by their leadership abilities. You find the folks who will stand up in front of a crowd and preach or lead singing or prayers or serve at the table or teach a class or prepare a class or do whatever needs to be done. If they're doing that and they're leading it, that's a pretty strong Christian right there, isn't it? And it's amazing that we do look at this. But there's a problem with using that kind of measure, is that it tends to look to the outward person. It tends to look to the outside of man. Because honestly, I tell you, I've known some people, it's very possible to preach, lead the singing, lead prayer, be here at every service, be involved in every activity, and still be spiritually poor and spiritually weak. Hypocrites can exist very comfortably in a measurement system like this, because all I got to do is make the outward show. All I got to do is show up and check the right boxes, and everybody thinks I'm pretty strong. But as God told Samuel, I'm not looking at what's on the outside. I'm looking at what's on the inside, because we can remain spiritually immature if all we're doing is worrying about what we look like on the outside and how man sees things. And so, because of these kind of tendencies, it's really easy for us to misjudge each other and ourselves. Let's always bring that back to ourselves. It's really easy to misjudge ourselves and condemn another person. We want to avoid that. James chapter 4 and verse 11 says, speak not evil one of another, brethren. He that speaketh evil of his brother and judgeth his brother speaketh evil of the law and judgeth the law. But if thou judge the law, thou art not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and destroy. Who art thou that judgest another? And we fall into that trap really easy, because I'm going to tell you, I was here last Sunday morning and Sunday evening and last Wednesday evening, and I'm here for all of that, and I was here, but there was this time, I don't know what it was, but for some reason Billy just wasn't here, and I'm not telling Billy that I'm worried about him. What I'm doing is I'm whispering to Neville how weak Billy is because he's not showing up enough. And we cause that judgment on people because we're getting these ideas because all we're seeing is the outside. I don't know where he is. But I'm not certainly going to look and say, well, he's not here, so he must be pretty weak. That's not how this is supposed to work. So what we really want to look at is what the true measure of a strong Christian. And we can find it here pretty simply. I think a good one here is in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22. The fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. He says there, against such there is no law. These are the qualities of a truly strong Christian, because these things are, Peter talks about the idea of adding on to these things and constantly growing in these things. And the thing is if we are loving, full of joy, peaceful, patient, gentle, good, faithful, meek, and temperate, well, we're following Christ's example. That's a strong Christian. And if we look to these standards rather than what we think the outward appearance of things, we're going to have a much better measure. And the problem that we have with this sometimes is that we miss it because it taints the things. It's kind of a challenge to this kind of measure, because it's very hard for me to know what Billy was doing when he wasn't here. What am I judging him, thinking of it? What he was doing? He didn't make it to service because he left his offering and went and made peace with a brother he was having trouble with. We're told to do that, right? Didn't Jesus say that? Leave your offering and go talk to the person you're having problems with. He was helping somebody who was having real trouble emotionally dealing with some sin in their life or something that needed done. We can find the great things in things. So the challenge of it is that we have to look inward on ourselves and inward on other people. And the real challenge of even meeting that standard is, again, it's deeper than just the skin. It emphasizes, the reformation of the inside of a person, and we trust that the outside follows. You can do lots of things publicly without actually having a belief in them, but certainly if you believe them, it'll come the other direction. What it does is, unfortunately, the way we look at it is it requires transformation. It requires us to change, not just to conform. Conforming is easy. Transforming, that's hard. We can look like whatever we want to look like, but to actually become the thing we should become is going to take time, and that's not time we always want to take. It's not time that we always want to take to recognize it in somebody else and to do it for our own selves. And this is the measure that often only the Lord sees. As we look at somebody, we have a quick few moments. You can call it your elevator pitch. When you meet somebody, shake their hand, say, hi, how you doing? Great, and that's about all they ever get to know about you, right? God sees this all the time. We only see each other, quite frankly, a short time comparatively during the week, right? Most of us, we kind of get here, we spend probably anywhere between 2 to 6 hours, depending on what's going on together. I spend more than that every day with a bunch of people at work. I spend more than that every day away. And so we kind of see how it's really hard to kind of see how things are going with each other, to measure properly. And on my own personal side, you find that it's really easy that for about 6 hours a week, I can fake it. I can fake it pretty easy if I needed to, right? We can all do that, but the Lord sees us how we really are. He sees through the facade. He sees how we really do things. We find that other people that we'll look at and we'll measure them and think they're weak because they seem passive about things are actually really incredibly active. They're active in their warfare against their own personal sin and their own personal temptations. They're active in their daily service to others for Christ. They're active in ways that we may never ever see, but the Lord does. The Lord looks on the inner man. The Lord looks, as he told Samuel, not on the outer stuff. That doesn't really matter, but all on the inner stuff. And so the measure that we take of ourselves and the measure that we, of course, will just as human beings take of each other, hopefully for the purpose of building each other up, has to be looking at the inward man. Because the purpose of discussing the true measure of a Christian isn't so that we can go around and go, I see how you're weak. I see how you're not doing the right things. That's not the purpose of it, but the purpose is to measure ourselves and to watch out for each other. Again, I'm never a big fan of the guy's comedy, but this phrase was made, it was Louis C.K. I'm not going to say go watch his stuff. He gets really filthy really fast, but there was a point that I saw from somebody sent me, was a thing about somebody talking about you never look in somebody else's bowl to see if you have the same amount. You only ever look in someone else's bowl to see if they have enough. And that's how we measure, and the purpose we have behind measuring each other to the Scriptures. It's not to see where somebody is doing wrong, but to see where we can help. to make sure that they have enough encouragement, enough strength, enough whatever it is that we can help supply. So the statement here that the Lord gives to Samuel, I believe really applies to us today. Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as the man sees, but man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So let's be careful as we go through life, as we see each other and we see ourselves, that we're measuring ourselves properly by the inward things, the things that God looks at, rather than the outward things that might make us famous, that might make us popular. God doesn't look at the same thing. God chose a different person to be king. Let's make sure that we're using the right measure and take the word and do that. And if for some reason tonight we have a need the church can help fulfill. We have water prepared. If it's the first time that you're ever learning to come to Jesus and we see the belief, we hear the confession, the repentance, it's amazing. We're prepared to help you in whatever way needs to be done. If you've done that before, you've risen up out of baptism, you've gone on your way, and suddenly you've messed up. We all do. We have the ability to work with you in this as well. We will pray with you. We will hold your hand, cry with you, laugh with you, whatever